This is Jamie Magrich. Welcome to Jamie's Craft Table. Today I'm going to show you how I made this card. Let's get started. Okay, for consumables, I have a scrap of gold cardstock. I have a piece of mossy meadow, which is 2 inches by 5¼ inches, or 5½ inches. Should be 2 by 5½. Yeah, okay. I have a 4¼ by 5½ inch piece of mossy meadow. I have a scrap of white to stamp my sentiment on. I have a piece of white which is 1 inch by 5¼ another piece of white which is 1 3/4 by 5¼ This piece of white I've already embossed, but it's 2 inches by 5¼ Then my card base, which is 5½ by 8½ scored and folded at 4¼ Okay, so these pieces can all get put aside for now. I need these 2 pieces here, sentiment piece. Now out of this piece, I've already done it just for time. I've die cut out 3 of those little fireflies and cut just a couple little scrap strips. They're like 1/4 inch. They don't need to be that large. Okay, so now I'm going to be using the Fern 3D embossing folder, which I've already used to emboss this piece. I'm going to be using Lighting the Way for those little fireflies or bees, whatever you want to call them. Stylish Shapes, I'm using this die here. If I can pick it up, to cut out my sentiment. And I'm using the Dainty Delights. I'm going to be using this one and this one and my sentiment. Okay, so let's get moving here. I think the first thing I want to do, this aside, I don't need that. I'm going to bring in my scratch paper. I'm going to stamp this little 1 inch strip, and that's 1 inch by 5¼ I'm going to bring in this little stamp. The only inks I'm using are Memento and Wild Wheat. So I'm going to bring in this little stamp. I just want to make sure the grass is going up the right direction. Other than that, there's no right or wrong, and I'm just going to stamp all the way up and down this little piece. Sometimes in the center, sometimes to the left or right. I'm just stamping the whole, all the way up and down it. Okay, so that looks good. Put that aside. We're done with this piece. We're done with this color ink. So now I'm going to bring in this piece. We're going to bring in this stamp and our Memento ink. I ink this way since it's quite a large stamp. Make sure I get it really well inked. And this is not the soft foam pad, this is the linen one, so I do sometimes twist it a little bit to get the ink coverage on there. Okay, now I'm going to stamp this down towards the bottom a little bit. Giving it firm, even pressure. Letting it sit there for a minute. Perfect. Okay. Let's set this aside for just a moment. Let's bring in that other strip of white. And I think I did them backwards. I did. So let's bring this back in. This should have been the one for the sentiment. So we'll do it again. So my paper has two sides, right? So we want the 1 3/4 inch strip. Okay. Not quite as nice of a stamped image, but it'll work. And this one will turn over. So we need to stamp the sentiment. Stamp that. Okay. Now I'm going to bring in my Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. Bring in this die here. I'm going to place the die so the sentiment is closer to this end, because we're going to end up cutting off a little bit there. Bring in a Post-it note to stick it so that it stays. Okay, I've got my main plate, one cutting plate, my paper with my die on it, and another cutting plate. And I'll run that through. I get that nice detailed edge. This away so I don't lose it. All right. We've got all of our pieces ready, so we can start assembling this card. So I'm going to bring in this piece, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I'm going to bring in this piece that we embossed, which is 1 3/4 by 5 1/4. I'm going to use my wet glue. Put glue on the back of this. I haven't used it yet today. I have a habit of leaving it out on my desk opened, which is not a good thing. And then it clogs up the end. And since this is very detailed, I want to make sure I have plenty of glue. Alright, and I'm going to put that over on this side. There's going to be like an 1/8 of an inch border around the edge, the top, right side and bottom. Should be about the same. Oops, make sure it's straight. It is not. There we go. Okay, now this piece that we stamped is going to go over on this side. Again, there's going to be that little bit of a border, top, bottom, and this side, this time the left side. Okay. Put this aside for a minute. I'm going to bring in this piece and we're going to do a little bit of coloring. We're using colored pencils today. I've got a Flirty Flamingo, Old Olive, Gorgeous Grape, and Daffodil Delight. So the Gorgeous Grape, I'm just going to do these little, kind of looks like lavender to me, I don't know, or heather or something like that. They're tiny little pieces. You could do them green too. It could be like a fern or something, but okay. And the these little flowers I did with the Daffodil Delight. That's why I chose to use a colored pencil. They're such tiny little flowers. It's going to be hard to do with the blends. Okay, then these flowers will get the Flirty Flamingo, or the pink color. Sure, I'm up here in camera. I have a tendency to not be. I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm just scribbling a little bit of color in. I tend to do like a circular motion because then you don't get quite as much of the streaky lines. Okay, then I'm going to use the Old Olive to do the leaves. Again, I'm not doing anything fancy. I'm just scribbling in a little bit of color in the spaces, just to suggest some color. Now you could leave it black and white. That would be pretty too. Okay. Now we're going to mount this to our Old Olive piece. And this is 2 by 5.5. Okay, then we're going to turn this over. We're going to put some dimensionals on the back of it. I forgot to get them out, so let me get out some dimensionals. Get those backs off. Excuse me. All right, we're going to bring in this piece. This is going to go right over this section here. So determine how much of this you want to show. And it's the same size as the card as far as up and down. Just try to get that lined up straight if you can. Okay, now we're bringing this piece. We're going to bring in these little gold strips. I'm going to bring in a pair of snips. And you see how these have these curves? We want to try to match that angle a little bit. So I'm going to angle this one this way. I'm going to angle this one this way. And it's probably not going to match exactly. That's fine. Put a little bit of glue on the back of this. Well, that's pretty too. Look at that. I like that look. Okay, now I'm going to pick up this gold piece. I'm going to leave it back just a hair from the edge. I got a little too much glue on there. You're not going to want much of this to show. Just a little bit. Okay, do the same thing on this one. Try to do a little less glue so it doesn't ooze. Okay, oops, this one slid. Tell because there's glue all over the front of it. And I'm going to come in with microfiber. I'm going to just dab that up. Okay. All right, let's turn this over. Now this part is raised, so this part doesn't get dimensionals. We're going to figure out where we're going to want this. We want to make sure the sentiment stays on there. I think this one I'm going to put down a little lower, so don't hide all my flowers. Although that's pretty too. Okay, so I just need a couple dimensionals on this side. One would probably be sufficient. A little bit of glue on this end. Take those backs off. Oh, and I think I'm going to put it down here this time. Change it up a little. Okay, now we're going to turn it over. We're going to use our snips to cut the end of this off. Okay. Oops. Got a little snip in that paper. Okay, now this is going to get adhered to the front of our card. Should be the same size. All right, let's bring in these little bees, or I think they're supposed to be fireflies. I'm going to bring in some smaller dimensionals. I could find some. And I'm going to put dimensional on the back. Put one here. Put one over here. This one, I think I'll put over here. I'm going to move this one over a little bit. There we go. Okay, so this one I'm just going to use wet glue. There we go. There's our card. I'll just change the positioning of the sentiment depended on how far over I put this. So I didn't want to cover all my pink flowers. Well, thanks for joining me today at Jamie's Craft Table. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I hope you can find a little bit of time to play with some stamps, ink, and paper.